So our next speaker is Dr. Sally Ferguson. She's a research professor and director of the Appleton Institute in the School of Health, Medical and Applied Sciences at Central Queensland University, or CQ University, in Adelaide, Australia. Because of the time differences between us and where she lives, she has sent us a pre-recorded video. And so I'll be playing that, and she'll be specifically speaking about some of those technologies that we were just discussing previously. Specifically, her presentation is called On the Move, Considerations for In-Vehicle Fatigue and Detection.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sally Ferguson. I'm the director of the Appleton Institute at CQ University in Australia. I'm based in Adelaide. At the Appleton Institute, we focus on health, safety and wellbeing at work, rest and play. It's great to be with you today. Thank you so much for the invitation. And also thanks for the opportunity to record the presentation. It is 3:30 a.m. or thereabouts as you listen to me today, and that is not my best time, I have to say. So hopefully I'll make a bit more sense on a recorded video than I would if I was joining you live. Having said that, I'm really disappointed to not be there to talk to you or to have a chat about this topic. I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on, particularly the last slide, the consideration slide. So if there's an opportunity to put things in a chat, or if hopefully I'll leave enough time for a discussion at the end, and hopefully I can get that copy of that recording, that'd be great. So please do have a chat when I've finished talking. And my email is on the last slide as well. So if you have any thoughts that you don't get a chance to share in the presentation slot, please do send me an email. I'd be really excited to hear from you. Before I before I start, I'd just like to say that in the spirit of reconciliation, CQ University recognises that traditional owners of the lands on which we live, work and learn. Today I'm recording this presentation on country for which the Boandik people have been custodians for many centuries, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and the hopes of Indigenous Australians. I'm going to do a super quick introduction because I reckon Imelda will have covered this, but I take any opportunity I can to talk about circadian rhythms, one of my areas of interest. So the term circadian is from two Latin words, circa, about, and diem, a day, and it describes our daily biological rhythms, so 24-hour rhythms. And we've got lots of different biological rhythms that are synchronized to each other and also to our environment. The circadian timing system consists of internal master clock, which is in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That won't be in the test. But also we know now, after 25 years or so of research, that we are full of little clocks. Most cells in our body have some kind of circadian clock. They all talk to each other, and that, as I said, they're all synchronized to the external environment by light, which hits our retina and is processed through into the circadian timing system. And so that keeps us synchronized. And if we are synchronized, like I am today, as a day active liver, all of our circadian rhythms are lined up, and we're doing what we are programmed to do. So this red line represents core body temperature, one of our strongest circadian rhythms, and very easy to measure and track the time on the circadian clock. If we're synchronized, then core body temperature peaks in the early evening. It drops when we are falling asleep, and indeed we fall asleep when our core body temperature is dropping fastest. Bottoms out in the early hours of the morning, the temperature low point, where sleepiness is highest, alertness is lowest, and performance is lowest, and then it increases, core body temperature increases as we prepare to wake up, and then it goes up during the day. And so, like I say, this is a picture of core body temperature, but performance and sleepiness and alertness all track very closely. And so we are absolutely best mentally and physically during the day, and we perform quite badly, or worse, I perform quite badly about here, which is about where my rhythm is as you listen to this in the early hours of the morning. We have a little post-lunch dip that's not represented on this schematic, but higher accident rates on the roads coincide with this dip and the post-lunch dip as well. And if we have a look at some very cool data that Dirk Jan Dijk and colleagues collected last century now, this is not a schematic, this is actual data from human participants in the laboratory, double plotted because it just makes it easier to see the rhythms. So this is core body temperature here, and this is time of day up here. So you can see that core body temperature in the early hours of the morning is lowest. It does go up in the afternoon, a tiny little post-lunch dip here that happens whether you eat lunch or not, and then drops as we fall asleep. And maps very closely cognitive performance. So these are tests that were done in the lab. Cognitive performance, and then subjective alertness, that is how people felt across the day. And so lowest when core body temperature is lowest, highest when it's highest. So fatigue hotspots are here in the early hours of the morning, coinciding, as you can see here, with performance, and this little one just after lunch. Elegant studies repeated in various forms in various labs around the world subsequently. And so if we shift from the lab out into the real world and think about fatigue and driving, now just a quick word that I'm going to use fatigue mostly, but I'm also going to say sleepiness because that is what many of the studies measure. Markers of sleepiness, also drowsiness is used, alertness is used. I'm using all of these interchangeably today. They do all describe slightly different things. But I hope you forgive me for some shorthand today. So universally around the world, we do know that sleepiness is a factor in about a fifth of road fatalities. We don't quite yet have the blood test for it, although boy is that work happening at the moment to try and get that. But it's at the moment sleepiness or fatigue is identified as a contributing factor to accidents. Largely by the way that the accident happens. That is a lack of corrective action, any witnesses watching or seeing how the driver is performing before the crash. You might get sleep-wake history, the recent sleep-wake history to find out what had been going on in terms of sleep in the preceding days. Of course, time of day is also a factor, and how long someone's been driving. And invariably, all of those things will allow an investigator to figure out that fatigue or sleepiness was a factor. 40% of drivers report having nodded off at the wheel. So this is not just those that are driving during the night or long stints. This is everybody. And we've all probably got a story of, if not having actually nodded off, then come close to or wondered if we did. So that's a lot of fatigued driving. And then work from Simon Folkard and colleagues did show that night work and extended hours, so that is driving in the dip in your circadian rhythm or extending wake and therefore having a bit of sleep restriction, is associated with up to 5-fold increase in risk of crash due to sleepiness. And so certainly work hours can impact our fatigue risk and our fatigue risk related to driving. And I think it's important just to super quickly say that while 20% of the Australian, American, European workforce does some form of shift work from the perspective of a traditional rotating shift, a whole bunch of us are also doing extended hours in some form, overtime or on call or standby work. As the devices go everywhere with us these days, work has crept in very much out to hours outside the traditional 9 to 5 hours. And so a lot of us are dealing with work that impacts sleep more often. We know that a lot of people do morning work, so pre-9 o'clock start, so maybe between sort of 7 to 9, which can result in truncated sleep if you've got a long commute. And then about 10% of these populations work very early starts, so perhaps starting sort of at 3 or 4 in the morning, which challenges sleep in all kinds of ways. And so I guess what I'm taking from these couple of slides is that the contribution to fatigue or sleepiness is coming from both the circadian rhythms, that is what time of day it is on our clock, as well as our sleep history. And so if we're talking about fatigue and driving and managing the risk, you probably have heard a little bit about sort of defences in depth or fatigue risk management systems in organisations already as part of the summit. If we take that and apply it to the fatigue and driving task, thinking about it at the different levels, managing the risks, we want to reduce the chance that fatigue is likely to happen or be elevated. So that's about managing how many hours people are working, how many hours they're actually driving, what their break periods look like, when their sleep opportunities are, particularly nighttime sleep opportunities, etc. So the roster level of things. Then also the next layer down is self-management. That is understanding what your signs and symptoms are, and because driving is an isolated task, you're mostly doing it by yourself. It is pretty much up to you. It's not like you've got a supervisor that's able to walk past you every 15 minutes and check in. So understanding what the signs and symptoms are, and specifically what your signs and symptoms are, and then doing something about them, responding to them, is important. And at this level also fatigue proofing, something that a term that Drew Dawson introduced a little while ago, and that our team's done a bit of work on, doing the things that can reduce the risk of a fatigue-related error or incident at times where fatigue is elevated. So one example might be changing the task, not really possible when you're driving, perhaps having a coffee, falling over, those sorts of things. And then, of course, at the last layer of defence, which I think is an important point, if I don't make it again, please grab onto it here, that in-vehicle detection really, particularly in organisations, should be, well, and even for private drivers, should be the last line of defence. And so in-vehicle detection of fatigue happening in various different ways. And I did a Google Scholar search for fatigue plus detection plus technology and got 1.3 million hits on Google Scholar. And just 22,000 of them since 2019. So this area is really booming, exploding in terms of the number of devices, technologies, tools out there, as well as the research that's going on, which is good. And so just picking up on these things, the cameras, vehicle performance, driver signals. I'm just going to put up this picture, which I have drawn from a review first authored by Dr. Jen Corrie, and I'm a co-author on this review, that had a look at fatigue detection technology from various angles. First, the link is here. I don't know if you can click on that, but hopefully you can copy and paste it or use the citation here to get a hold of the review. But I'm just going to start by quickly going through the ways that fatigue detection technology in vehicle is measuring or detecting signs of sleepiness, drowsiness, fatigue. One is by driver physiology, a couple of different ways, looking at what's going on with the eyes, either with fixed cameras or down here, or wearable sensors in glasses. EEG in a cap, so looking at brain activity, and then ECG through the steering wheel and also seat sensors. That technology is growing as well. Driver behaviour is another one, actually detecting head nodding, which is a fairly advanced behaviour if you're thinking about where you're up to in the fatigue on the way to actual sleep. And then vehicle performance, lane keeping and steering measures. So most of the fatigue detection technologies use some form of these. Some now are also using combinations of these to pull driver physiology, for example, together with vehicle performance. And so in the review that Jen led, we looked at different considerations for fatigue detection technology. A couple of things that came out of it, and the way that Jen organised the review. Two modes of monitoring in this technology. So one is continuous, that is the camera or the sensor is detecting signals constantly, reviewing them constantly, assessing them constantly, and then will alert the driver if a threshold is reached. So that's continuous. And then there's fit for duty monitoring, which would normally happen at the start of a shift or for cause if an incident occurred, or to extend a drive, or at certain times of the day, depending on the risk assessment. So that's momentary. Jen looked at cost models as part of the review, including the initial outlay of purchasing devices, but also ongoing monitoring and reporting functions that the providers give organisations. So there's various different considerations for cost. Alert modes was also something that Jen had a look at, auditory and visual. But I guess the most interesting part from our perspective was the validation and the degree to which these devices have actually been independently looked at in scientific, rigorous, peer-reviewed studies. And the answer to that is not very much, actually. And I'm skipping over the results, and you can have a look at the paper because it's quite detailed, and we've got some great tables in there that give a lot of information about all of the technologies that we've reviewed in 2020, published in 2021. Many probably have come onto the market since then. But there's a lot of detail about the ones that we actually had a look at. So, but Jen pulled out a few recommendations from the review that we did. And one of them was, well, the main one is that longitudinal, so across time, extended periods of time, naturalistic driving studies are actually needed. A lot of the independent scientific studies that are done have been either in the lab, where obviously people aren't driving cars, or on the track where they're driving cars, but in a very controlled manner. And so really what is needed to understand a range of things and to answer the questions is some longitudinal and naturalistic driving studies. One of the main reasons is that we don't actually have very many of these good studies, independently reviewed studies of the actual device. Like I said before, most of the devices are based on well-validated measures of fatigue or signals of fatigue, the ocular, the driver performance stuff, but we haven't actually got great studies on specific devices. And going along with that, we don't therefore know whether the devices themselves and all that comes along with them, the way that the alert works, the way that a fatigue event is managed, et cetera, we don't know whether that changes crash rates. So we don't actually have that data yet. Also, we don't really understand how drivers are using the information from the alerts. And this is an important one, because it would be great to know if the alerts that drivers get saying that fatigue is elevated, likely you fell asleep. It would be great to know if that information actually helps drivers to do things differently, whether they learn about their own signs and symptoms, whether they start to use information that they are getting about themselves better, whether they are able to predict a bit further in advance that fatigue is likely to be a problem for them. So that would be another reason that these longitudinal naturalistic driving studies would be useful, and to really engage the drivers in those. And then, of course, to compare devices. Organisations will understand that, regulators will want to understand that, and eventually the courts and legal bodies will want to understand that as well. Maybe insurance as well, insurance agencies. So the this is really what I want to hear from you all about, your thoughts on these things. I've divided the considerations into three groups, I suppose. Individuals, and from that perspective, I'm really thinking about individuals who are driving for work, and so they've got a fatigue detection technology in their work vehicle that's been placed there by their employer, as well as Sally Ferguson, who drives her own car to work and to her block. Does that translate? Her country scrub block. That probably doesn't translate. Anyway, drive my car out of the city. So for individuals, there's, if you're an employee, understanding and believing the rationale for why this stuff's getting installed in your vehicle, and also being part of the solution, owning the solution to whatever the risk is that has been identified. That's important, I think, for individuals in organisations. Data privacy is obviously very important for individuals, both employees and Sally Ferguson driver. How data is collected, where it's stored, how it's used, who has access to it, when, all of that is things that is information that needs to be figured out and then shared. How events are managed, so that is, when I say event, I mean the system has rung a bell or shaken the seat or flashed a light because it's detected fatigue or sleepiness. How is that information then used? How is it used by an employer? What happens to me as an employee if I've had 1 event, 2 events, 6 events? How it might be used by, I don't know, insurance agent, my insurer, my car insurer down the track. And then as an individual, important to be considering whether a fatigue detection technology adds a distraction to my drive, whether literally by its dinging or metaphorically, just by my knowledge that it is there. So I think distraction is also an important part of to be considered. At the organisational level, we've touched on a couple of these, but it kind of comes from the other direction, or has different considerations. How a fatigue detection technology is rolled out, the implementation as part of a safety management system, the training, education, bringing employers, drivers along for the journey. Oh, that's a bad pun, but I'm glad I used it. So implementation considerations are really important. Obviously, the cost per unit, as I flagged before, and whether you have ongoing maintenance, whether you've got a system that is monitored by an external party, those sorts of things. Dealing with false positives is an important one, and anyone who's got experience of drivers with any kind of camera in their cab will know that drivers get very frustrated if they get false positives all the time. That is, it's dinging, and it is not anything to do with fatigue. So there are some repeated examples of people. If they are not looking straight out the windscreen for whatever reason, you might be driving, doing a driving task that actually is slow speed, and you need to be looking outside the vehicle, so the device will ping off at you. You might be singing very loudly and with a wide open mouth, indicative of a yawn, and the thing might ping off at you. So dealing with false positives is a big consideration for organisations and also for individuals. And then how organisations use the data. So there is going to be a wealth of data that comes out of these devices, and how there's a great opportunity for organisations to be using that data for continuous improvement in their whole system. That is, if you're getting fatigue events that are actually legit, that indicates that your roster's not providing people enough sleep, well then that's great data to actually use well. And then there are these big questions in what I've called community. As this sort of technology rolls out in private vehicles and it comes into our into Sally Ferguson's Hilux down the way, the legal and regulatory models and as I mentioned before, insurers and other bodies that would like to get a hold of the sort of data that these things collect. There's a lot to be figured out there. My lane keeping warning, it will ping if I have cautiously and safely gone over the middle lane to go around a cyclist. It'll make the same noise as if I've bent over to pick up something off the floor and veered over a lane. So the data looks the same, independent of what I've actually done in the vehicle. And so how that data is used by all of these groups is going to be really interesting. And then the infrastructure is another one. Some of these technologies need to be networked to send information back and forth either to an employer or to the monitoring centre, the control centre. And in Australia, of course, we've got big gaps in our networks, and so that's another consideration that will come down the track as well. So, Tim, I've gone really fairly quickly over some of the big considerations, and hopefully I've left enough time for you all to have a chat or to just write me an email and tell me everything you're thinking about this this presentation, this topic. Maddie's coming up next, and she has got a bit more detail about the application of this technology in different settings. And so make some notes and then perhaps send them to both of us when you have a chance. That's my email there. And thanks again for having me.
All right. Really great presentation from Sally. As she mentioned, I think she's very interested in anybody's thoughts, questions, comments directed to her. She gave her email on that last slide, but I will be putting in the chat a file with all of the emails from the presenters today so that you can reach out to them directly with questions or comments or anything that you might want to share. As she mentioned, one of her colleagues, Madeline Spricer, at the same university she works with, she'll be up next. We also have a pre-recorded video from her, and so she'll be taking off from where Sally left. So at this point, we do have a 10-minute break. I didn't see any questions or comments in the chat to address. So we're going to reconvene in about 10 minutes at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, after which Erin Mabry will be taking over moderating duties. So until then, we will see you at 1:30 in about 10 minutes. Thank you very much.